There's some physical quality of the olive oil that gives experience. And the good thing about experience is you can't spin it into oblivion.
It's not about being Jewish or Muslim. It's about being willing to see the truth and do something about it or not. That's all.
Zatoun, a life story in 4 parts. This is the second, the little project that grew. Assalamu alaikum, shalom aleichem, peace be with you. I'm Michael Riordon. Zatoun is the Arabic word for olive. It is also a Canadian grassroots initiative to bring fair trade organic olive oil from farmer cooperatives in Palestine to North America. It depends entirely on volunteers. Who are they, and how do they connect with Zatoun? Miriam Garfinkel, for one, works as a medical doctor in a low-income Toronto neighbourhood.
Fundamentally, I was raised as a humanist by my parents, who were Jewish, but more importantly, they were humanists, and to me that is a part of being Jewish. My mom always said she believed in humanity, so, that was a very strong part of my upbringing. I think my main way of looking at things is putting myself in someone's shoes, whether it's about someone who's homeless, and I work with people who are homeless, what it would be like to be that person, looking at other as somebody that's you, rather than out there other. Not stereotyping someone, like someone who sits on the street panhandling isn't just them. They're a person. They have a history. They have feelings, history. There's a reason why they're there and why they got to this spot, and understanding that and treating them with respect. So I think that's really a big thing that shaped me.
Carole Chalbois was born in Quebec, grew up in California, then as a young adult returned to live in Montreal. There, a mutual friend, a Romanian Jew, introduced Carole to her future husband, a Palestinian.
My husband was born in Haifa in 1945. His family and him and his young sister lost everything during the Nakba, and they went all over the Middle East as refugees. I think a lot of the Palestinians who came to Canada, they left that behind. They didn't want to think of the suffering, the bad thoughts, anger, the sadness, and all of that, and I think a lot of them have put it behind them and just want to get on with their lives. So we led a very suburban, middle-class life, bringing up our 2 children and my stepdaughter. And we were very typical of Canadians, knowing a little bit about the Palestinian issue and thinking that somebody should do something about it.
In 2002, their worldview expanded dramatically when they acquired Al Jazeera, the international television news channel based in Qatar on the Persian Gulf.
One of the first things that we observed was the attack on Jenin, the refugee camp that was leveled by the Israelis. And we helplessly watched the destruction of this refugee camp, and ambulances that were crushed, people that were crushed, medical aid that was denied. And we were shaken to our core. And we decided, well, if nobody's going to do anything about it, we'll become involved.
Even after the murder of the child Muhammad on Rosh Hashanah, the paper didn't go black. In the same water in which the snipers wash their uniforms, I prepare my pasta, and over it pour olive oil in which I've browned pine nuts, which I cooked for 2 minutes with dried tomatoes, crushed garlic, and a tablespoon of basil. As I eat, the learned Minister of Foreign Affairs and Public Security appears on the screen, and when he's done, I write this poem. For that's how it's always been. The murderers murder, the intellectuals make it palatable, and the poet sings. From Rosh Hashanah by the Israeli poet Aharon Shabtai. Smadar Carmon grew up on the Kfar Menachem kibbutz, not far from Tel Aviv. The army episode she describes occurred during her military service, which is compulsory for both sexes in Israel.
I was getting kind of mixed messages because my parents told me always that all people are equal, and my father was very idealist, and he really believed that every person, no matter what color or where he comes from, has the same rights. At the same time, he was a Zionist. So on one hand, he learned Arabic. On the other hand, there would be a lot of racism kind of thrown without even noticing, of how they're all liars and they don't even believe each other, and they basically untrustworthy and losers. In the army too, I heard horrible stories sometimes. The group of soldiers I was with, they would be sent for special missions on the West Bank, and then they came back always with stories. And once they told about how they were just sitting in the back of a truck and somebody threw in a Palestinian guy and they basically beat him to death. It was oh my God, but it wasn't enough for me, because the whole environment and how I was brought up and how people around me speak with each other somehow makes it acceptable, believe it or not.
Now living in Toronto, Smedar works as a volunteer with Zatoun and also with Jewish Women Against Israeli Apartheid. Every Friday as Shabbat begins, they hand out leaflets on a busy downtown street near the Israeli consulate, to quite mixed reactions.
People tell me, yeah, you're brave to talk the way you're talking. It's not brave, it's normal. Because it's not about being Jewish or Muslim. It's about being willing to see the truth and do something about it or not. That's all. And all the rest of it is just this huge smoke screen that gives time, meanwhile, for the colonizers, Israel, to keep doing what they're doing. They're constantly building, they're creating facts on the ground. It's so deceiving, and they get away with murder.
Hedy Meissen lives in the rocky wooded hills near Westport in eastern Ontario. She was born in Holland in 1939, just before the Germans occupied the country.
My parents were part of the resistance in Holland, helping the Jewish get out to Portugal. My mother was German and my father was Dutch in Holland during the war. So my mother knew the script of the German, so she did the signatures on the passports. And my father was a photographer, so he did the pictures. Yeah. So she had lots of stories, and I don't know whether that has anything to do with this whole thing with Palestine and Israel. I think now the tables are being turned. What's being done to the Palestinians was a little bit of what was being done to the Jews in Germany. And it's not right. It's horrible.
At times when we feel as if the world must be coming to an end, our only hopeful vision is to go out and plant olive trees. If we don't plant any trees today, there will be nothing tomorrow. But if we plant a tree today, there will be shade for our children to play in. There will be oil to heal the wounds, and there will be olive branches to wave when peace arrives. From Bethlehem Besieged, Stories of Hope in Times of Trouble, by Palestinian Lutheran pastor Mitri Racheb. Founded by the Quakers in 1917, the American Friends Service Committee works for peace and social justice throughout the world. In Atlanta, Georgia, Samir Mukaddam is Program Director of the Friends Middle East Peace Education Program.
What we're about is to mainly educate and inform the U.S. public about issues that concern the conflicts in the Middle East. And of course, one major conflict we work with is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We basically try to do education on stories, on news, on analyses that don't get enough coverage through the regular mainstream media or mass media. We work on the basis that justice is a requirement for long-lasting peace. So we do all of this education in the hopes that once people are informed, they can also influence public policy through their elected officials, through their newspapers, and so on. In the main way, we want to deal with the U.S. policy side of it. How is the U.S. contributing to this or not contributing to peacemaking? So all of this is in the hopes of changing U.S. policy.
In Zatoun's first year, 2003, Robert Massoud and a few volunteers sold 1,500 bottles of Palestinian olive oil, mostly to activists in Montreal and Toronto. Now, in year 5, hundreds of Zatoun volunteers will distribute 25,000 bottles across Canada and the United States. Robert Massoud.
For me, what I've recognized is in our world, I think particularly in the West, we are starved for engagement with reality. We are so disengaged from reality through the media, through our lifestyle and so on, that we hunger for reality. And that's what Zatoun has been very good at, I think, and fortunate, is that we've found ways to engage people. Zatoun has, in its essence, it's a real substance. It's not just talk about the Middle East. The thing with words is most often words just lead to confusion. They're just spun. And you walk out of there more confused than ever, and then basically giving up hope of our understanding. You just kind of wash your hands of the whole affair. Whereas the olive oil, I think, really strikes people at a heart level. There's some physical quality of the olive oil that gives experience. And the good thing about experience is you can't spin it into oblivion. That's been its success, I think, is it has touched people in a real way.
To ensure the best return for Palestinian farmers and support for vital projects in the West Bank, volunteers sell the oil person to person in towns and villages, workplaces, schools, union offices, temples, churches, and synagogues. Smadar Carmon in Toronto.
For me, it was exactly what we need, because what I see that is so lacking here is that people don't know what's happening there. The truth hardly ever comes out. And Zatoun is a fantastic way to just tell the story in a way and create some interest. And also it's building something, because it's not a charity. People are earning a living in a very honest way, besides that it's wonderful oil.
I did not betray my homeland, and my shoulders did not falter. I stood in the face of my oppressors, orphaned, naked, and barefoot. I carried my blood upon my palm, and did not let my flags lower, and sustained the green grass on my ancestors' graves. From Stranger in My Own Country by the Palestinian rap group DAM.
رامي الماضي برا من حاله كالسيف الماضي يعارك سلاح الحاسب ضمن مي يقتل الصوت المصلح برصاصه الحي ودمعة الام تصيح انا اسيل على خط عربي.
Hetty Mason in Leeds County, rural Ontario.
Before the Iraq War, I hadn't been here all that long, but the rumbles were going on, and I was getting really upset because I didn't know many people around here. So I called a teacher of mine from Seneca College. And she said, well, why don't you join Voice of Women? And I said, okay, and then I'll get the newsletters. And so the first newsletter I got from Voice of Women had a little tiny writing on the flap of the envelope, and it said, Hetty, I'm from Westport. Next time I'm in town, we should get together. And she was stuffing the envelopes from Voice of Women. So I met her, and we became really good friends. And then she came with a bottle of Zatoun olive oil. This was years later, and I used it, and I thought, oh, well, that's a good idea. And then it ran out, and then I thought, well, I'll look up Zatoun on the internet and see if I can get it, because I didn't know how to get it. And then I realized you can't just send for one bottle. So I thought, see if anybody else wants any. So they did, but that's how it started pretty well. I wanted some, because I liked the whole idea, and it was a practical idea. Because, you hear of things, and what are you going to do about it? What can we do here for the horrors that we hear about there,
Samir Mukaddam of the American Friends Service Committee in Atlanta, Georgia.
The idea started by saying, okay, Palestine and olive oil and olives and olive tree are connected, and how can we use the stories behind the olive oil and the olive trees to educate on what we do. We educate on what the occupation of Palestine means, what the realities of the occupation are. There are many connections and stories to be told there about the struggle of the farmers to harvest their olives, to get their olive to the oil presses, and to get their olive oil and olives outside the country so that they can survive. In this sense, we found Zatoun to be a supplier of this fair trade olive oil. Also, that Zatoun is also interested in not just selling the olive oil, but educating with every bottle that is sold through either a brochure or the story that is told with every bottle, or through the projects Trees for Life or Project Hope. All of these help our educational efforts. So that's how we ended up being involved with Zatoun.
Carole Charlebois in Montreal.
I was volunteering at the Canadian Palestinian Foundation of Quebec, and I answered the phone, and there was Robert. And we started to speak on the phone just in generalities, I guess. I think we lost touch for a little while, and then he popped up again, and he talked about Zatoun that he had founded, and I thought it was a very good idea. It started off slowly, He sent me some cases. I don't know how many it was the first time, and I started to sell it. And actually, I was selling the olive oil before I even saw him again. He just sent me a shipment of olive oil and trusted me. There was no paperwork. There was no documentation. There was just based on faith and gut feeling about me. So now I've been selling, I don't know, between 15 and 20% of the olive oil that's been sent out there.
Miriam Garfinkel in Toronto.
It just captured me, as an idea to do something. Here's somebody who's really trying to do something concrete and okay, so I'm tired of political meetings. Even with people that you agree with, there's always these personalities and these problems, and you get into these discussions, and then it wears you down. But when you're selling Zatoun, you don't have that happen, I enjoy doing it, and I don't think it's okay to enjoy doing something good. I mean, it happens on all different fronts. So we need people working, frankly, on the boycott and sanctions, and people have to be working at all different levels. So I certainly don't think Zatoun is the only thing, isn't enough. It's not enough just to do Zatoun, but so it's one bit that I can do.
You've been listening to Zatoun, a life story in 4 parts. This was the second. For the music, thanks to the Palestinian rap group DAM, D-A-M, the Arabian MCs, and Le Trio Joubran. Zatoun, a life story, was produced by Michael Riordon. Next, part 3, Palestine in a Bottle.